The early months of the Second World War at sea were not marked by great clashes of heavy fleets, but by the elusive movements of solitary raiders. These ships, operating independently, became shadows on the ocean, predators and ghosts, forcing the world's largest navy to chase phantoms across thousands of miles. Among these raiders, one vessel stood above all others, the Admiral Graf Spee. Her mission, her voyage, and her destruction would become one of the most dramatic naval stories of the war, a tale not only of steel and fire, but of deception, honor, psychology, and the tragic burden placed on one captain's shoulders. In the late summer of 1939, Germany's naval leadership knew they were unprepared for a duel with the Royal Navy. Hitler's ambitions had outpaced the shipyards. The German fleet was small, scattered, and nowhere near ready for a symmetrical fight. Their only hope lay in a strategy as old as naval warfare itself, commerce raiding. Rather than facing battleships head-on, the plan was to strangle the Empire's supply lines by scattering fast, heavily armed ships into the Atlantic before the war even started. The Graf Spee slipped her moorings and vanished into the Atlantic days before Germany invaded Poland. She would wait silently in the South Atlantic, engines idling, lookouts scanning the horizon, until the signal for war arrived. Her mission was precise: hunt merchant ships, follow the strict code of prize rules, and avoid combat with equal or superior warships. Every order emphasized survival over glory. This was a ghost ship meant to disrupt the arteries of an empire. Her very design reflected the strange political constraints of the era. Born under the Treaty of Versailles, she exploited every loophole available. Nominally limited to 10,000 tons, she in reality displaced over 16,000 when fully loaded. She carried 11-inch guns, far larger than anything expected on a treaty-limited ship, and diesel engines that gave her astonishing range. This combination of speed, endurance, and firepower prompted the British press to give her a name that has persisted ever since: the pocket battleship. But while her engines gave her range and tactical acceleration, they also came with flaws. At full speed, the diesel vibration interfered with fine mechanical instruments, especially her rangefinders, and her thick exhaust smoke, dark and unmistakable, could betray her position long before she spotted her enemies. The man commanding this steel anomaly was Hans Langsdorff. He was no Nazi zealot. He was a quiet, disciplined officer who carried himself with an air of professionalism more reminiscent of the Imperial German Navy than the ideological fervor of his own era. He had fought at Jutland as a young man and still believed in the chivalric traditions of the sea, that war could be conducted with humanity. For weeks after war began, Graf Spee waited, maintaining radio silence. Hitler feared provoking neutral nations and forbade the sinking of passenger ships. Only on September 26th did orders finally arrive to begin commerce operations. When the first prey appeared, the SS Clément, Langsdorff followed the letter of the law. He halted the merchantmen, evacuated the crew, and only then opened fire. Every sinking followed that same formula: warn the crew, save their lives, then destroy their ship. Langsdorff became known among prisoners for his courtesy. The captured merchant captains often noted in memoirs that he apologized to them before sinking their vessels. The crew was allowed on deck, given cigarettes, even spoken to as equals. Yet this humane treatment contrasted sharply with the experiences aboard the supply ship Altmark, whose captain kept prisoners in cramped, dark holds. Many of these men would later become central figures in the famous Altmark incident months afterward. Throughout the autumn, Graf Spee roamed the South Atlantic like a phantom. Her supply ship met her in remote patches of ocean to refuel and offload prisoners. To deceive Allied intelligence, Langsdorff continually altered the ship's silhouette with fake structures and false funnels. She sometimes flew foreign flags until the last moment. Her pattern of movement was unpredictable: long drifts at low speed, sudden dashes at 28 knots, loops and hidden arcs that made her seem to be everywhere and nowhere. In total, she sank 9 merchant ships, totaling over 50,000 tons. Not one sailor was killed. But her success triggered an enormous Allied response. The Royal Navy assembled multiple hunting groups, spreading them across the Atlantic. Among them was Force G, commanded by Commodore Henry Harwood. He carefully studied the raiders' previous attacks and reasoned that the next target would be the River Plate estuary, a choke point through which huge quantities of South American goods flowed to Britain. He assembled his small squadron, one heavy cruiser, HMS Exeter, and two light cruisers, HMS Ajax and HMNZS Achilles. Individually, each ship was outmatched. Together, they might stand a chance if they could fight as three blades aimed at a single point. At dawn on December 13, 1939, smoke appeared on the horizon. Exeter signaled, "I think it is a pocket battleship." Within moments, both forces realized they were closing rapidly. Langsdorff made his first and most critical mistake. He assumed the cruisers were escorting a convoy and closed the distance to prevent their radios from warning others. By the time he recognized the formation, the range advantage of his 11-inch guns had been lost. At 0618, Graf Spee opened fire. The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. Graf Spee concentrated her main guns on Exeter, whose bridge was obliterated early in the fight. Smoke, fire, and shattered steel filled the air as the British ship attempted to steer. Using improvised communication lines and wounded sailors carried messages down splintered decks. Exeter was mauled, listing a fire her turrets silenced one by one, but she refused to break. This stubborn resilience forced Langsdorff to keep firing on a ship that should have been long dead, allowing the two light cruisers to close into ranges where their smaller shells could pepper the German ship's superstructure. It was during this rain of 6-inch fire that a seemingly minor piece of damage occurred. A fragment struck Graf Spee's fuel purification system. That system was essential. Without it, the ship could not safely make the long voyage back across the Atlantic to Germany. Her fate was sealed in that moment, though no one realized it yet. By 7:40, Exeter withdrew. Ajax and Achilles had suffered damage as well. Harwood ordered a cautious pursuit. Their plan was to shadow Graf Spee, maintaining pressure and waiting for nightfall to attempt a torpedo attack. Langsdorff, increasingly worried by the damage to his ship and the growing casualties aboard, decided to break off and head toward Montevideo, neutral territory. Upon arrival, he immediately became the focus of a diplomatic storm. British officials in Uruguay pushed relentlessly for the ship's expulsion, while German diplomats pleaded for time. Uruguayan authorities granted Graf Spee 72 hours, longer than the standard 24, but far from enough to make her seaworthy. British intelligence then executed one of the greatest bluffs of the early war. They planted rumors, manipulated press reports, and ensured that German agents overheard leaked information indicating that the aircraft carrier Ark Royal and the battlecruiser Renown were waiting outside the harbor. In reality, only two cruisers and one newly arrived heavy cruiser were present, damaged, outgunned, and dangerously low on ammunition. Langsdorff believed the deception. Berlin's messages were equally grim: avoid internment at any cost. If escape was impossible, destroy the ship. On December 17th, tens of thousands gathered along the Montevideo shoreline, expecting a dramatic last stand. Graf Spee slowly steamed out, her crew already disembarking to nearby tugs. When she reached the edge of neutral waters, the scuttling charges were detonated. Flames blossomed inside her hull. The ship burned in the twilight while the crowd watched in stunned silence. There would be no final battle, only fire and the slow settling of twisted metal into the muddy estuary. Langsdorff brought his crew to Buenos Aires, where they were interned. For him, however, the psychological toll was unbearable. He had saved the lives of more than 1,000 men, yet he believed he had violated the ancient code of captains. He wrote final letters, calm, dignified, deeply sorrowful, and ended his life wrapped in the battle ensign of his ship. His funeral was attended not only by Germans but also by British officers. They saluted the passing of a man who had fought hard, treated prisoners humanely, and showed honor in a time when such qualities were rapidly vanishing from the world. The destruction of Graf Spee was heralded as a major British morale victory during the otherwise quiet, phony war. The aftermath rippled on. The Altmark incident, the salvage of the wreck, and the international debates over artifacts recovered decades later. Yet the true legacy of the Graf Spee lies not in the wreckage, but in the strange mixture of old and new that defined her story. She was a ship designed for a style of naval warfare that was already passing into history, commanded by a man whose values seemed relics of another century. Her end came not through overwhelming firepower, but through psychology, intelligence, and the careful manipulation of perception. A ship of steel defeated by rumors. The Graf Spee remains today beneath the waters of the River Plate, a monument not to Nazi aggression but to a curious moment in the war when humanity, deception, bravery, and tragedy all collided on the open sea.